Even when I watch them on Saturday Night Live with the where they have Maya Rudolph playing you, I hate it. I don't want you being made fun of.
Oh my God!
There's too much at stake. I believe the entire future of this country right now. I mean, as America, land of the free, home of the brave, I think it's literally on the line.
So a guy who's supposed to be funny for a living now claims her candidacy is too important to joke about. This is a guy who once joked right after the Columbine massacre that the killers should have students before killing them. Not that I like that Stern.
Something just snapped in the world of fame and microphones, and it wasn't Howard Stern's hair dye. Greg Gutfeld didn't just clap back. He bulldozed right through Stern's legendary act, leaving fans wondering if the so-called shock jock finally got shocked himself. Was it ego? Was it karma? Or was it just Greg being Greg? Whatever it was, this takedown might be the plot twist Howard never saw coming.
Pendulum swing from saying the most tasteless thing in the universe to putting your balls in a Tic Tac container. You gotta wonder what's going on here. It's striking that the king of the most misogynistic humor ever now turns into a breathless over a progressive, hopelessly shallow candidate.
There was a time when Howard Stern wasn't just a radio host. He was the human Molotov cocktail of American pop culture, a guy who made his living by being the loudest, crudest, most unapologetic figure behind a microphone. Stern was the anti-hero of radio, the man who turned being offensive into an art form and carried it like a badge of honor.
In a conversation with that crew, so how's your health? 6 vaxes, 2 boosters, and an echinacea enema. And I only got COVID 4 times. Oh yeah, I did a triple vax and an IV booster trip, plus I gave Dr. Fauci a reach around. He was like, come on, Jimmy, don't worry about your sofa. I'm not a super spreader. But the dinner isn't the story. It's what Howard said later on his radio show. Quote, I really had an exhausting weekend. Emotionally, physically. For the first time in 2 years, I ventured out of the house. Now, maybe he's exaggerating. We all do that. In fact, the more successful you get in media, the more exhausting the easiest things become.
The FCC hated him, polite society loathed him, and his fans worshipped him because of it. He was dangerous, unpredictable, and the kind of guy who could start a moral panic before breakfast. But that was then. Fast forward a few decades, and the rebel king of shock is now polishing his crown at dinner parties with the very celebrities he used to roast alive.
And like Howard, for a spell, I retreated to a cabin in the woods during the lockdowns. Not for long, but I did have to feed those teens in the root cellar. They grow up so fast. Right through the ropes. But Stern being holed up in his house that long, it explains a lot of things, like how you forget how other people live, especially in hard times like a pandemic. For the longest time, 2 years in fact, the same time Stern's been AWOL, I wondered where he went. Not physically, but mentally. I bet you did too. Remember his screeds about COVID? They were epic and angry, and not to mention wrong.
Howard Stern, the guy who once made Hollywood squirm, now spends his afternoons kissing it on the cheek. Somewhere along the line, the man who mocked elites decided to join them. It's like watching the class clown grow up and become the principal. Except this principal wants to be invited to the cool teacher's lounge.
You should hear what keeps him up at night.
This is what keeps me up at night. I don't understand how my fellow Americans, I don't even understand how this election is close. And yes, I'm voting for you, but I would also vote for that wall over there.
Well, he's half right. We do need a wall. You know, to keep out gang members, fentanyl dealers, human traffickers, and Anna Navarro. What's funny, though, is that Stern actually thought that was a compliment. Stern has become such a wussified sycophant, he doesn't realize that telling Kamala that he'd vote for a wall is telling her that he knows she's as dumb as...
And that's where Greg Gutfeld comes marching in. If Stern was the rebel of the 80s, Gutfeld is the jester of modern cable TV. Armed with sarcasm sharp enough to slice a steak and a knack for mocking just about anyone breathing in the political or celebrity space. Gutfeld didn't claw his way into late-night comedy by playing it safe. He got there by torching the sacred cows that other hosts polished with reverence. While the Jimmy Fallons of the world danced for approval, Gutfeld was happily tossing grenades and giggling at the fallout. So what happens when a former rebel, now dressed as an establishment gatekeeper, gets a verbal beatdown from a guy who thrives on exposing hypocrisy? Well, you get Howard Stern stumbling out of the cultural boxing ring while Greg Gutfeld takes a bow, cigar in hand, like a villain who knows he's the real star of the show. The transformation of Stern is almost Shakespearean. Once the outlaw of the airwaves, now the friendly neighbor who tells kids to keep it down after 9 p.m., his fans remember the days when Stern made even his guests sweat bullets with off-the-wall questions. Today, Stern treats interviews like he's hosting a celebrity book club. The raw edge is gone, replaced with polished charm and predictable nods to Hollywood pals.
It is really sad and pathetic, though, isn't it? Because he's used to be this anti-the-system type of dude, and what that is just being victim to the manipulation of the system, right? Like, that is what people who make money off of people thinking that want you to think. But that's what happens when he's been too scared to leave his house since COVID, right?
Yeah.
So that's how one person was like, he has been. That's what happens, is he doesn't get to know, I mean, that's what my whole book's about. He doesn't get to know people. He's so wrong. That attitude is what's wrong with this country more than any single politician.
And here's where Gutfeld found his golden ticket. Stern reinvented himself into the very thing he used to mock, and Gutfeld spotted the irony like a hawk circling a wounded rabbit. The so-called shock jock who once shredded celebrities for being out of touch is now sitting on a throne of out-of-touch opinions himself. You can practically hear Gutfeld smirking from across the studio, mocking Stern's transformation with a level of irony that borders on brutal. Stern's fans aren't blind to it either. Many of them have already staged their quiet rebellion, peeling away from the cult of personality they once adored. They look at him now and see a man who traded chaos for comfort, rebellion for reputation, and raw honesty for safe applause. And to those fans, Gutfeld doesn't just look like another commentator, he looks like a mirror held up to Stern's contradictions. The trigger that set this whole feud ablaze wasn't some random slip of the tongue either. Stern, as usual, couldn't resist throwing his elitist takes into the cultural conversation. Whether it was his political grandstanding or his endless digs at people who don't live inside his Manhattan bubble, Stern practically painted a target on his back. And if there's one thing Gutfeld never ignores, it's a big, fat, neon target begging for ridicule.
This whole idea, if you like me, you're good, and if you don't, you're bad. I mean, I've been the victim of this. I don't hate the guy. I hate the people who vote for him. I think they're stupid. I do. I'll be honest with you. I have no respect for you.
So, Gutfeld went in. No gloves, no mercy, no polite nods to Stern's so-called legacy. Just a full-on dismantling of a man who built his career as a rebel, only to retire into the cushy role of establishment mascot. Gutfeld pointed out the obvious: Stern has become what he once mocked. The rebel is now the hall monitor. The provocateur is now the protector of the same thin-skinned elites he once mocked on air. And here's where it gets brutal. Stern's entire career was built on the idea that he was untouchable, that no one could out-rebel him. But Gutfeld's takedown was less about insults and more about exposing Stern's transformation for what it was: a sellout dressed up as sophistication. It wasn't just funny, it was devastating. The internet exploded. Clips of Gutfeld mocking Stern spread like wildfire, with fans on both sides rushing in to either defend the fallen king or cheer for the jester who toppled him. Stern's defenders tried to spin it as maturity, as growth, as evolution. But Gutfeld's critique cut deeper. It asked the uncomfortable question: since when did maturity mean abandoning the very identity that made you famous? This isn't just about two egos colliding. This is a cultural snapshot, a moment that shows how fame warps rebellion and how some people age into irrelevance while others seize the spotlight by mocking that very irrelevance.
But it is incredibly brave to take this stance after you've made $300, $400 million not being woke, right? Loving Donald Trump, exploiting the mentally ill, wearing blackface. Look at the crop of woke comics, whether it's Stern or Jimmy Kimmel, his BFF, Sarah Silverman, Joy Behar, Michael Ian Black. What do they all have in common? They wore blackface. And then they went woke. It's not a chicken or egg thing there. You know what order it came. So I call this BFR. It's blackface reparation.
Stern represents the old guard, clinging to an empire of shock that no longer shocks anyone. Gutfeld represents the new wave, someone willing to roast anyone. Yes, even the so-called legends. And the beauty of it all? Stern can't win this fight. If he lashes out, he only proves Gutfeld's point, that he's thin-skinned and desperate to cling to relevance. If he stays quiet, then the silence is deafening, confirming to everyone that the roast landed exactly where it hurt most. The brilliance of Gutfeld's takedown wasn't in some over-the-top rant or juvenile name-calling. No, the comedy was in the precision. He didn't need to scream, he just needed to point out the absurdity hiding in plain sight. Stern built his empire by mocking phonies, and now he's the biggest phony in the room. That's not an insult. It's a tragic punchline, the kind of irony you couldn't script better if you tried. Think about it. This is the man who once roasted celebrities for living in bubbles, for being pampered, out of touch, and self-absorbed. Now, he practically lives in a bubble-wrapped penthouse where the only sound louder than his opinions is the applause from Hollywood dinner guests. Gutfeld didn't need to exaggerate. He just held up the receipts and let Stern's contradictions do the heavy lifting. And this is where Stern's downfall stings the most. The fans saw it coming. They noticed the shift years ago.
She also appeared on Howard Stern, where he said he'd even vote for a wall over Trump. Harris replied, "I'm not a wall, but I am plastered." And so, Howard, you've been in therapy for what, 50 years? And I just diagnosed your problem in one monologue. No worries, the first visit is...
They watched their anti-establishment hero slowly swap his leather jacket for a tuxedo, his blunt honesty for careful PR-approved lines, and his rebel energy for mainstream acceptance. For them, Gutfeld wasn't saying anything shocking. He was just the first one with a big enough microphone to say it out loud with a smirk. The reaction was priceless. Clips of Gutfeld's roast were passed around social media like contraband in high school. Former Stern diehards couldn't help but laugh at how brutally accurate it was. The man who once made a career ridiculing hypocrisy had somehow become the punchline of it. And the funniest part? Stern practically handed Gutfeld the material on a silver platter. This wasn't just a roast, it was a generational shift unfolding in real time. Stern, the so-called king of shock, suddenly looked more like the monarch of mediocrity. Gutfeld, on the other hand, looked like the mischievous court jester who'd figured out the king was naked and announced it to the entire kingdom. And here's the deeper irony. Stern's original appeal was rebellion against polished radio hosts who played it safe. He was the guy who made fun of stiff suits and scripted routines, but in trying to reinvent himself as the polished, safe, Hollywood-friendly elder statesman, he turned into the very thing he used to rip apart. If this were a movie, it'd be marketed as The Tragic Fall of the Shock Jock. Spoiler alert, the ending isn't pretty.
But it is funny, after 300,000 years of functional biology featuring both male and female organisms, in just the last few decades, we have thoughtful experts deciding that all of that is wrong. What an about-face. It's not unlike Howard Stern. I mean, talk about a transition. On Tuesday, he conducted an interview with Kamala Harris that was so simpering and feminine, I got my period while listening to it.
But don't think this is just Gutfeld taking a cheap shot. This was strategic. Every time Stern goes on a political rant, every time he calls people beneath him or tries to play cultural gatekeeper, he gives Gutfeld more ammunition. And Gutfeld knows exactly what to do with it. Pack it into sharp, sarcastic jabs that expose Stern as the emperor strutting around with no clothes. The irony practically writes itself. Stern, the man who made his living off being unfiltered, now looks allergic to controversy unless it involves scolding people for not agreeing with him. The king of offensive humor has become the self-appointed morality police. And Gutfeld naturally couldn't resist pointing out that watching Stern scold people about being offensive is like watching a pyromaniac lecture about fire safety. The fan reactions told the whole story. For Gutfeld's crowd, this was a comedy masterclass, a perfect storm of timing and irony. For Stern's remaining loyalists, it was a gut punch, a reminder that their rebellious hero had traded shock value for respectability. And even they couldn't deny that Gutfeld's roast had a sting of truth. What really set this apart, though, was the cultural undercurrent buzzing beneath the feud. This wasn't just about two media personalities trading blows, it was about authenticity versus reinvention.
Maybe that's the explanation. This is Stern's self-imposed for subjugating women to demoralizing stunts, capitalizing on desperate females thirsting for attention, even if it's from an oily paddle striking their bare asses. True, much of Stern's transformation is based mainly on a delusional hatred for Trump, but it's also coming from a bottomless hatred for himself and his past. And he's projected his loathing onto Trump, which gains him accolades from his Hamptons neighbors and his new pal Jimmy Kimmel, who's also doing for his sins of the past.
Stern represents the old guard, people who built their careers by tearing down walls, only to later build the same walls back up to protect themselves. Gutfeld represents the new wave, people who thrive on tearing down those walls again and laughing at the rubble. It's the classic cycle of rebellion. Every generation has its rebels who eventually age into the very establishment they once fought against. The hippies who railed against corporations now own them. The rock stars who screamed about conformity now sell insurance in commercials. And Howard Stern, the shock jock who made his name by mocking elites, is now busy hosting those same elites like he's auditioning to be their PR manager. Meanwhile, Gutfeld swoops in with that sly grin, happy to remind everyone that rebellion isn't a one-time thing you cash in on. It's a constant performance. And right now, Stern looks like the washed-up band trying to play new songs nobody wants to hear, while Gutfeld's the punk kid with a guitar who just stole the show. What makes this story so entertaining is the inevitability of it. Stern couldn't escape this takedown because he wrote the script himself.
Stern got even more pathetic, wondering how she doesn't nap.
When you said you don't nap, I get it, because like what you've taken on is extraordinarily difficult. And I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment in the sense that, like, when I met you out in the hall, I said, I'm really nervous because I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country.
Hold on.
He set himself up as the anti-establishment figure for decades, so when he flipped and became part of the establishment, it wasn't just a career move. It was an invitation for ridicule. Gutfeld didn't destroy Stern because he hated him. He destroyed him because Stern gave him all the material and dared him to use it. And the timing couldn't be worse for Stern. In an era where audiences crave raw, unfiltered commentary, Stern is still trying to sell the polished, watered-down version of himself. Meanwhile, Gutfeld is out here throwing grenades and laughing while they explode. It's like watching someone try to play chess while their opponent is playing dodgeball with live explosives.